Good morning, Warzone kids. This is part 5, and I think the last part of because I'm kind of growing sick of it. I think it's going to be part 5 and the last part of my side quest off the main trail to the Western Lands into the Briar Patch of Union organizing campaigns, my work and life. Warzone kids is my term for those of us. I'm a child sex abuse survivor who grew up in an environment that was more like low-grade guerrilla war and less like a supportive nursery. And we Warzone kids, our soul, our psyche is like a Jenga tower. And by the time we get into adulthood, our Jenga tower is like a tall, swaying thing, unsteady, ready to fall down. As an adult, I live with borderline personality disorder. I'm a recovering addict and bulimic. And I see life as a pilgrimage to the land of the Western Lands, to the trail to the Western Lands, a place of peace and wholeness where I learn to become what I am. And on that main trail, this is a little side quest where I'm going to share a little bit about my experience in the wacky, full contact world of union organizing campaigns, which has been my working environment for about 20 years. About 10 years on the union side, about 10 years on the management side as a hired gun campaigner. This is part 5. Now, and again, there's nothing partisan about this. I am not here to tell you if you're working in a place and there's a union organizing campaign going on. I'm not you. I can't tell you which way to vote and whether you like the union or you don't like the union or you like your job or you don't like your job. These are not factual questions. These are questions about you and your life and how you live through the world. And I have a stance of peace toward you, so I'm not going to try to tell you different. This is about the dynamics and whether we approach each other as chimpanzees ready to go to war over whether we're in this hooks or snooks, the good tribe or the bad tribe, whether that's our stance of war or whether we have a stance of peace toward each other, like citizens having a debate at town meeting over whether or not you want 2 snowplows and we're going to pay a little bit more taxes for it, or whether you're happy with 1 snowplow and leave taxes how they are. Citizens or chimpanzees, how do we want to relate? Roman diplomats would reach into their toga when they did diplomacy, and they would pull out a loaf of bread and they would pull out a short sword. And they would say, I got peace in the one hand and I got war in the other. Which one do you want? Well, the salient part of that image for me, Pilgrim, is that Roman diplomat brought with him the bread of peace and the sword of war right there in his own toga. And that's how we relate to each other, and that's how we relate to the world. War or peace, chimpanzee or citizen. Now, 3 minutes. There's my 4-part recap. This is part 5, the last part. And I want to talk about, I'll just call it like this: chimpanzee organizing and citizen organizing. Organizing is the word for what you're doing whenever you try to get a bunch of people to act in a certain way. I have a very, very ambivalent relationship toward this. When I was in the union, that's, you learn all about organizing and different models for it. And I'm going to leave all that alone. I'm not interested in a political, socioeconomic, or economic debate about any of this stuff. Organizers are human beings, and they're human beings that feel called upon to engage in an effort to change the world around them. And Lord knows that is common enough in this day and age. And it's very hard to look at the world around us in 2026 United States and not want to change it. And if that's your living, if that's how you make a living, if that's what you're called upon to do in this world, then that's what you're called upon to do in this world. I ain't telling you that that's wrong or right or anything else. It's just a fact if that's what you're called upon to do. But you can organize in a way that leads you toward chimpanzees fighting, and you can organize in a way that leads you toward citizens disagreeing. And there is something inherent in the nature of the way union organizing works in the United States presently that leads it toward the chimpanzee kind of thing. It's just inherent in the nature. There's a fixed deadline. There's a vote. On the union side, you have to work very hard to create that situation where there's going to be a vote and there's going to be a fixed deadline and there's a fixed universe of voters. And when the board agent tallies the ballots, one side's going to win, the other side's going to lose. there's a lot of reasons in the union organizing world why labor organizing tends heavily toward a hook and snook kind of thing. There's the good tribe and the bad tribe. And I'll just leave it at that for now, because I want to spend the rest of the time here talking about I'll call that chimpanzee organizing that leads toward tribal conflict. That is a feature of human nature as far as I can see, and I'm not here to say it's good or bad. It seems to be a feature of human nature. I want to talk about citizen organizing and a fella that I think you ought to know about if you don't already, Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was a man after my own heart. He was a campaign strategist, not in labor organizing. I think he may have done some of that, I'm not sure. But I would say community organizing, if you could call it that. He was a leading strategist in the civil rights movement in the United States early on. And I'm probably going to get some of the details wrong here, but not that wrong, and they're basically going to be right. Bayard Rustin was the strategist who developed the notion of a campaign that led to Rosa Parks refusing to sit down and take her seat in the back of the bus. This is a watershed, polarizing moment in the American Civil Rights Movement where a black woman, Rosa Parks, got on a bus, and as I understand it, she was directed to go sit down in the back of the bus, where my fellow creatures that are black Americans were told that they had to sit. And Rosa Parks declined that demeaning, shaming, humiliating offer. And she elected, as my fellow human creature, to stand up and stay in the front of the bus, where she belonged. And as I understand it, that campaign, that tactic, belonged to Bayard Rustin, my fellow creature who was a black American, a strategist, spent some time in India, spent some time looking into other ways of seeing the world. And his basic approach to bringing about change was this. He took as a strategy that, and you can read about this in his memoir, A Time on Two Crosses. He had the strategy that he and his fellow organizers, his fellow black Americans, his fellow human creatures who wanted to change the rampant overt segregation and the overt racism that he lived in. And his strategy to change it was by insisting, in two parts, insisting on being treated with dignity and respect as my fellow human creature. And also insisting on treating everyone around him with the dignity and respect as human creatures that he demanded for himself. He treated and encouraged others to treat and organized around the idea of treating the white people who were beating him and picking him up bodily and throwing him off buses and out of restaurants. He insisted, as a core element of the strategy and the tactics, that they treat those people causing them harm with exactly the same respect and dignity that they demanded for themselves, that he, Bayard Rustin, demanded for himself. He insisted on that treatment for himself, and he insisted on treating his fellow human creatures around him with that same respect and dignity as fellow citizens of the world. I'm just going to use that word citizen loosely. It would be very hard to argue that he was a citizen in any kind of full sense at that time. But he acted. He was my fellow human creature, and he was a citizen of the tribe of human beings, living in the world that was not that much different than the world of, in the way that I'm fixing to say here. The kinship between the world he lived in and the world of, say 5th century Athens, where citizenship is also very important. But in 5th century Athens, only about 10% of the people were full citizens. You had to be basically a property owning man of a certain age in a certain station in society. And about 90% of the people weren't citizens. And I don't know what number you'd get if you looked at, in the 50s and early 60s in the United States, what proportion, or in the early 20th century, what proportion of the United States consisted of people that were full citizens, possessed of the nobility of being a full human creature. It was probably not that much different than Athens. Was it more than 10%? I mean, you had literacy tests at polls and whites only, and women couldn't vote at the beginning of the century. I mean, it's a mess. But Bayard Rustin is a fellow that I recommend you to. Take a look at him, because he held on to a passionate devotion to changing the world in a way that insisted on regarding himself and those around him as citizens. He insisted on being treated as a full human creature, and he insisted on treating those around him as full human creatures. He lived in a world of peace in the middle of that war, that low-grade, that straight-up war against people of his kind. He lived in a world of peace because he merely insisted on being treated with dignity and respect. He wouldn't have it any other way, even if he was being bodily thrown off a bus. He insisted on maintaining his dignity as a human creature. And he insisted on treating the people who were throwing him off that bus as his fellow human creatures with dignity. Insisted on it. Now, Bayard Rustin's memoir is called A Time on Two Crosses, because he was a black American at a time when that meant he was on a cross. And he was a gay American at a time when that meant that he was put up on a cross. So his memoir is called A Time on Two Crosses, because in the Venn diagram of that, he was a gay black American. And that was in no sense an easy thing to be. In fact, he was rejected by many of his fellow civil rights activists, even though he was a strategist par excellence. He was a high-level, Sun Tzu-level strategist who brought to you the Rosa Parks campaign. And he insisted the whole time on being treated as a human being, and that he would view himself. He viewed himself as a human creature with the full dignity that he deserved as a human creature, like you are and like I am. That's a stance of peace in a time of war for this guy. And that's the stance I live in toward my fellow human creatures. And that, I think, brings us to the end of this side quest through the Briar Patch of union organizing campaigns. The Briar Patch that this pilgrim has been about 20 years in. And on a daily basis, I do my very best to approach myself and my fellow human creatures in the spirit of peace, with the dignity that they are my fellow human creatures just as I am, and I am a fellow human creature just as they are. And I reach in my toga and I bring out the bread of peace. That's what I try and do in this Briar Patch. It's a beautiful day on the Trail of the Western Lands, pilgrim. We can get in a lot of miles. Let's get them together.